Okay, bear with us just a minute. I think there is a problem with Vivian's presentation.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you, Vivian. I was wondering.
Yeah, sorry, I was forced out of the room because I needed to address the setting on my computer for sharing my screen.
Okay.
I apologize for that. Now, can you see my screen okay?
Yes, we can. All right.
Right, thank you. Alessandro, you have read the title for me, so I can go straight to slide number 2. I'll begin with some background story about why I'm doing this kind of research. This presentation is not about an exact study where I explore intercultural communication studies in Buddhism and discover some, but this is about the story behind that research. And the point that I want to make is to show you a case study of what inter-epistemic research might look like. And I'm aware that there can be many, many ways of carrying out this kind of research, but I do find this is a very new experience to me and very revealing in many ways. So how did I start? I have been an academic working in the field of intercultural communication, and these are the key concepts and terms or ideologies that have been lingering in my mind for years since I started this career. Essentialism, non-essentialism, critical pedagogy, social justice, decolonizing intercultural education, and more recently, there has been this emerging or increasing voice about decolonizing research practice and the way we teach intercultural communication and the use of multiple languages and looking beyond Western or Eurocentric epistemologies. So all of these things I've been embedding into my teaching and research, I found very helpful for me to engage with research which expands from one language or one tradition of knowledge. But they're encouraging, but they are not the immediate reasons for me to do research involving more than one language. So along this academic or intellectual trajectory of thinking and research, I have been working practically in a business school for 10 years. It's not very long compared to many of you, but it is long enough for me to notice repetitions of patterns in my students' intercultural experiences in the classroom or beyond. I have always been teaching large numbers of master students who are very, very diverse. Whatever that means, they've come from very different countries and different age groups, different genders and different sorts of values. Large numbers, the standard size is usually over 100 students. This year I've got 300 in total, last year 500. That means they become the reality of my life, my everyday life and my professional life, which means I do not have the time to collect data and to focus on research beyond the classroom. But these students, they bring the reality of diversity to me. And every year I have witnessed so many different stories and dramas by working with them through their projects and their studies in general. And I want to emphasize that they're master students in the UK. That means the time they spend with me is short, a couple of months, and that is all done. And we have to condense many of the teachings and knowledge and theories into like 10 weeks. And they've got a lot of workload to deal with. So in my course, I always ask them to do group work. And we've got loads of reasons to justify that. They're in the 21st century. We need to learn to work with diversity and to tackle the challenges and try to explore the enrichment. But every year I have heard disturbing stories from them about working together. And there's this irony because they have committed themselves to studying intercultural communication. On the other hand, they from time to time gave me this impression, or I observed that they don't know really how to handle disturbing moments or challenges. And sometimes they turn to me for some kind of counseling or advice when they sort of come into clash among the group members and they don't know how to avoid potential acts or practices of various isms, such as essentialism against their peer students. So with this observation in my practical professional life going on, sometimes I felt myself puzzled by what I've been thinking about as an intellectual and what I have actually been doing as a practitioner working with real people. And these students are in the business school, which means that they're not, most of them are not planning to develop a career in language teaching or intercultural communication teaching. They're going to various industries and hoping that they can bring something from my modules into their practical life. And on one occasion, a student confronted me in a class saying, after spending all the time with this, I know how I can deal with these issues in practice. So I wrote down some questions, or I phrased that as self-questioning in my personal notes. I just read this highlighted bit. As academic specialists in this field, what advice do we give to individuals who struggle to live with and through everyday episodes of prejudice? So that is a very real moment to me when students turn to me for advice about, for example, group members disappear and group members do not seem to be equally keen to put into the same level of contribution. And what can I do? What shall I suggest? Shall I ask them to tolerate because their commitment to cultural diversity or intercultural competence, or do I intervene with some sort of module leader's power to change the coursework? And sometimes I feel that I do not have a very, very solid criteria or guidance that I can use to help my students. The second question I personally find very disturbing, but is there real that I perceived? Do such narratives exist that individuals identified or identifying with culturally marginalized groups express contentment with the environment? And that is something I don't usually hear from research narratives in our field, but that is something I personally feel that is very necessary, especially when we struggle with difficulties, with conditions that we do not feel that we have the power to change. And we must be able to find a way to live through the difficulties until we can do something, whether that means to change the conditions where we live or we see an end of a tunnel of some sort. And notice that when some students come to me for a dialogue, for whatever purposes, and it is that kind of wisdom they're needing, and I feel incapable of providing. The third question, to what extent can we constructively enlighten others as to the complexities associated with all kinds of difference, prejudice, discrimination, if we ourselves also suffer from similar vulnerability to prejudice? And the last one on my list here, how far can mantras about human connectedness, be it tolerance or solidarity, or actions against specific unjust acts, for example, those anti-campaigns, anti-racism, anti-essentialism, how much can these actions or these slogans help us ease the disquiet in our heart when we're facing immediate realities that are disturbing our mental, psychological, or even physical well-being? So I found myself struggling with what I perceive to be an epistemological problem. I'm not suggesting that the things I've read from the literature in our field is not useful enough, but I feel that there must be something else, because I sometimes felt torn between what I'm hoping will happen if I do this. If I help my students understand, help them improve their practice, that will happen at a point in future. But then there's the other side of the story. Everyday life today, this is the problem. How can we get through that? So that's the background against which I notice my thinking turning towards an alternative tradition. And in this case, it's Buddhism. I'm not suggesting that my research in this direction is a more advanced or better direction, but this is a move I have never made before, which kind of opens my eyes to a much wider world or realm of knowledge. And actually, in my readings about Buddhism, I discovered many overlaps between this so-called Eastern religion or philosophy and Western knowledges. And I started to question this idea of Western-centric, because that sounds like oversimplifying or even essentializing Western knowledges as well. So anyway, saying before, I'm just going to illustrate what I did in this small piece of research and what kind of revelations I encountered. So I started this journey, even though I was born in China and I've got those Eastern or Chinese cultural backgrounds inside me in whatever ways. Buddhism was very exotic to me until rather recently. So when I started seriously looking at this body of knowledge, I wondered where I should actually start. In English, my mind was very straightforward, it's Buddhism. But when I looked up literature in the Chinese scholarship, I couldn't find one equivalent to the word Buddhism. Scholarly studies of Buddha Dharma. So with my academic mind turned on, I was keen to find that one source book to start with, which is valid, which is reliable and traceable to a trustworthy source, but I couldn't. So I had to make a decision. Buddha religion, for itself, that's not something I was immediately keen to embark on because I thought that's too far away from what I've been engaging with professionally. Maybe not quite about the history of Buddhism. I thought if I got a book about that, I might just read it for 2 weeks and leave it behind. So I sort of decided to begin with the Buddha Dharma. That is the Sanskrit word, which can be understood in various ways. I did check with some students in my class from India, and many of them in their modern Indian languages mindset, they understand that as truth. But from my readings, Dharma is closely related to praxis, how to apply the concept taught by the Buddha into everyday life. So I thought I would begin with this, as well as scholarly studies of Buddha Dharma. So that is what people like us in the Department of Philosophy and Religion, they explore Buddha Dharma or religion in conventions which are more familiar to what we do. So my first move was to start with some original text or semi-original, i.e. classical Buddhist scriptures. And I felt grateful because I had this convenient tool in terms of language, which is Chinese. So I went straight ahead to original Chinese Buddhist scriptures. And I want to quote the words written by Kenneth Lieberman, who felt exactly the same as I was when we started reading Buddhist text. Kenneth Lieberman, back in 1990, to Tibet to study Buddhism. He himself was a philosopher and a sociologist based in America. So he was using a bit of sense of humor to describe his frustration in the first few tutorials. The basic structure of the texts involved in the tutorials provides all the excuses necessary for the problems I had with comprehension. The text in the first tutorial consisted largely of the philosophical arguments of Tsongkhapa, who can be dated back to the 14th century, who relied heavily on the interpretations of someone else, another 7 centuries ago before that, who was refuting a third person, another century before that, who in turn was citing for criticism another person who was then commenting on the founder of someone else. And later on, Kenneth said, the text in the second tutorial, although not so thickly embedded, employed many citations, including quotes within quotes and debates within debates. And it was possible to lose track of who was speaking there as well. This is the moment where I felt exactly as Lieberman, and I nearly just wanted to walk away because it doesn't fit in with my convention of doing research or serious research of any type of knowledge, because I just simply could not trace the source. Everything was so intricately intertwined together. And I just thought the whole thing lost credibility. But somehow I continued because simply based on the fact that Buddhism has such a long heritage and reputation, I was keen to find out why. What made it so vital, what brings the vitality to Buddhism for it to survive and thrive for so long, if we couldn't really even identify or verify the source of it? So I started reading Chinese, and then I thought one day I might want to share that insight or any findings with my English speaking friends. So I worked between Chinese and English, and eventually I engaged with some Sanskrit as well, because I was not satisfied with the meaning offered by either Chinese or English. So the first time in my research career, I list, and I know these Sanskrit words. I never say them correctly or know the exact meaning, but I had to let go of that desire to verify that target meaning and to accept that the meaning resides somewhere between the different variations. And I just want to highlight one of these words, svabhava, 自信. That is where I got from the English commentary about this potential overlap between essentialism and Buddhist doctrines about the lack of essence. So, right, I'm reminded that I only have a few minutes left. So I'll give you some examples of where I found the Buddhist text really frustrated me, but I somehow decided to continue until I found that revealing point. For example, this idea of not thinking and not thinking. When I read that from the scripture, I just totally thought that's nonsense, because I have really thought about an action which is described as a non-action, and I couldn't even imagine what is that action we can be doing, or a skill which is between not thinking but not giving up thinking. Another one, amazing, incredible. Once the Buddha asked his disciple, how big is the universe? The disciple said, it's incredibly big, amazingly big. And I thought, what is all this? Why am I reading this Buddhist text, which is teaching us to avoid bantering, to avoid being ideas? So I had to figure out what the meaning is in attracting so many people to read them. And so this is what I did, listen to the Buddhist Dharma, English and Chinese, which I had access to, books in both languages, not only by Buddhist masters, but also by cross-cultural philosophers who try to establish links between Western philosophies, such as postmodernism, and Buddhist philosophies. So I came to deepen understandings of the same words. I wouldn't say there are correct understandings, because this whole journey of engaging hermeneutically with meaning of ideas and then connecting that with the practice just totally dismantled my desire to get that correct or the most accurate meaning. After letting go of these ideas, I came to understand this with a bit more depth, I would say. Not thinking and not thinking. Now I understand it to mean to suspend conceptual thought while still engaging. And that is a state of, I would say, a state of being or existence that was very, very unfamiliar to me before. I just couldn't, in my previous mind, I couldn't imagine how we can engage without activating our thinking mind. And this amazing, incredible, is not simply an explanation. It is describing a state or a phenomenon which is so profound or so grand that is beyond our language to describe. It is that which cannot be fully conceived with words, beyond our conceptual reasoning. So it is unspeakable, ineffable. And that is, there's a lot of similarities between things of English commentaries, similarities between these and Western philosophies of language, about the limit of language, reach the glass ceiling of language in terms of expression. And that's the point where we perhaps can find a lot of alliance and collegiality, rather than turning that point into misunderstanding or hostility. Right, time is up. Actually, I'm coming to an end with some closing remarks. I can't conclude anything because this research is still ongoing, but I do get an experience of these in a multifaceted way. When I embarked on this research on Buddhism, which is foreign to me, I noticed various points where I felt uncomfortable and I resisted. But then I prompted myself to continue until I started to question my received notions about what is valid, trustworthy, and normal, and how to see the connections between ideas and concepts and not to drown in the analytical and create a lot of terms and words, but they're not actually linking that to reality. So this might look like common sense to me, but I want to finish this presentation with a simple statement: to know that we don't know by having an actual experience and by doing it. Right, I hope that makes sense. I did rush through everything a bit, but okay.
Thank you, Vivian, for such interesting and thought-provoking presentation. We have a few minutes for questions and answers. So if anybody in the audience wants to ask Vivian a question, you can do it directly through the microphone, or you can write your questions on the chat. Let me see if anybody is raising their hands. Yes, Emilia Bettina has a question.
Hi, thank you so much. And thanks, Vivian, it was very interesting. I wanted to know, in the beginning of the presentation, you said that you wanted to give a certain wisdom to your students that they were asking for and you weren't prepared to give it at that time. So I was wondering, have you sort of at this point so far given guidance, verbal guidance, perhaps to your students through kind of a Buddhist framework, and how have they accepted it? And if you have not, how do you feel about the prospect of doing it?
Thank you for this question. That's a very difficult one for me to answer and to deal with when students come to me. With the influence from these Buddhist ideas, I found myself increasingly encouraging my students to accept. And I feel a bit disturbed by this idea, actually, because accept can trigger a lot of suspicions, and they might be connected with like conformity to many things. But if I'm allowed to go back to the previous slide, I can't move, but I was talking about this thinking, not thinking, and not thinking thing. Now, I used to, this is all about dualism, binarism, not, it's like action. We used to be thinking about action, and the opposite must be non-action, not doing anything, being indifferent to people's sufferings, being indifferent to all to the things that are going wrong. But when students came to me, I can feel their suffering, like some students perceived racism from their group members. Well, I heard counter narratives from the students who were complained about, and I could feel how they struggled to avoid giving their group members this feeling that they were giving racist expressions, where they're simply just desperately wanting a high grade. And they're very exact in terms of the quality of their group project, but they somehow felt that their other group members let them down, and they struggled to find the right expressions to make themselves understood in a way that is appropriate. So I have to deal with such cases, case by case, and I do notice myself advising them to accept, because, as I was saying, this is a short master's module, and it is not practical to expect major changes. We have to get this done, and they have to get the credit by the deadline. And accepting it as what it is not the fault of anyone. It is people from different cultures with different expectations. They were kind of forced together to learn about coexisting. And you get value from that, and that value are transferable to the future. But I don't know, well, as the lecturer, I do have the power as well, because I'm the person who's eventually giving them the grade. So I kind of imply to them that you shouldn't worry too much about your perception of the quality of the work, because I do take that into consideration. But in such cases, there's a lot of persuasion going on towards being with what you find, where you find you are, in addition to like voicing their concerns, because concerns and sometimes resistance just don't get them anywhere within this time frame. I don't know if that addressed the question, but it is a tough one though.
Yes, thank you. It is a tough one, I agree, which is why I was interested in hearing your answer.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Vivian, we have one more
Uh,
question by DJ
okay.
Kang and a couple of questions on the chat. According to the turns, let's go with DJ Kang, and let's see if we have some minutes left for the questions on the chat, or otherwise maybe you can share with us your email to address these questions directly. So yeah, DJ Kang.
Hi, I'm Dongjing. Now currently I'm in Seattle. It's quite dark in my background, so I'm really interested in your project. So I'm just curious, among all these terminologies in Chinese language related to Buddhism, is there a particular term that can be an umbrella term that could guide your step in intercultural communication? Since I was so intrigued by this, how should we engage the philosophy or scholarship of Buddhism to work with all these duality, all these anti campaigns, or the self and the other. So this is something that I've been working on as well. So I'm just very because I can see these are some vocabularies that are highly spiritual and also philosophical, and how do we bridge that experience?
Thank you for this question. I like it, but I don't think I can answer it within the time I have about how we should. I would say I personally find this type of research revealing, and I would encourage any like-minded researchers to carry out similar research. But there are challenges. For example, we simply need more words. If we want to get our work published, we need more words to justify why we're doing this. We need more words to present the different languages in order to comparison, to demonstrate the overlaps across different domains of knowledge. So there are have to negotiate with the current conventions, and we just have to make that endeavor to negotiate that space. But how we should be doing this is definitely much more than a simple translation. And it's about building, as you say, building a bridge between different domains, which cannot even be compared. They're not just two parallel domains of knowledge we can just juxtapose together and then connect so easily. We need to build maybe a third space where we explain both, and then to tap into a third domain where we make the voices join together. Yeah, I can't come to a particular answer, but
sure, yeah.
Just thinking in space.
I understand. In addition to the question, I just have a really quick suggestion, because I studied Tibetan language and Tibetan Buddhist translations, and also Sanskrit. So Dharma, the capital D, is truth, like you said. But Dharma with a small d is in Sanskrit and Tibetan can also be all phenomena, like wan xiang in Chinese. But I can see all these vocabulary can connect to one Buddhist terms called non-duality. Non-duality in Chinese is and it's a leading term for us to redefining the relationship between the self and the other. And hopefully this can be a continuing for us to discuss. I'll definitely catch you after.
Yes, definitely.
On email.
And I absolutely agree with what you said. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian, for such enriching presentation. We have now the second presentation of the day. New methods new interculturalities, some thoughts on uses of post-qualitative and performative methods in researching the cultural by Professor Dominic Busch and Emilian Franco from Universidad the Bundeswehr München.
Yes, so thank you for the introduction. Let me just share rapidly my PowerPoint presentation. And then Dominic, you can start.
I will start. New methodologies, new interculturalities. We, both of us, actually are not post-qualitative researchers, as is announced in the subtitle. We are doing research on intercultural communication, and we read into fields of post-qualitative research, especially during the COVID-19 lockdown times. We had a lot of time to read, and we just wanted to share a few thoughts with you from our reading. Actually, to be honest, our first entry point was an article last year from our IALIC journal Language and Intercultural Communication by Gabriele Budach and Goha Sharoyan, exploring vibrant matter in animation making. In that article, the two researchers report on the way of the researcher participating in a university workshop on animation making, and the whole article describes the process of how the author produces a video animation, and the actually intercultural communication aspect, to put it in a very, very short nutshell, actually comes in the end when the workshop is finished. The workshop participants share their results, and they have a very great and huge intercultural understanding instead of the previous competition atmosphere. And we were very much fascinated from that. And on the other hand, we thought, well, it is very much different from what traditional intercultural communication might be about. So when we decided to dive more into the field of post-qualitative research, actually what we found is that there's a huge increase in recent years in publications using post-qualitative research methods in the field of intercultural communication. Our own paradigmatic approach, or our point of departure, might be summarized as follows. We think that research publications are part of a wider academic and discourse, research questions and research designs, normative orientations. And we think that pieces of research from that perspective can be seen as socially acknowledged and accepted packagings for communicating and expressing these normative orientations. So from that point of view, we think it might be even more interesting to look behind the scenes of this presumably straightforward research. Instead of looking at the actually results they communicate, it might be even more interesting to reveal their underlying normative orientations that come across instead of the straightforward research. We actually did, to summarize, is we analyzed academic publications as pieces of discourse. To explain that a little bit further, we might need to step one step back beforehand and have a short look at the role of theories and we found out that, or we got the impression that there's an intercultural research to, on the one hand, talk cultural communication research as a young discipline, that this young discipline has on, for example, positivism, interpretivism, and cultural communication in its last 20 years has gone through all these paradigms. So there's almost a tradition of defining intercultural communication research by going through these theories and by these theories. In contrast to that, the role of methodologies for driving the discipline forward or not driving it is rather neglected. There's actually only one point where methodology is considered, and that might be post-colonial thought. Post-colonial thought might be the only movement that addresses the role of methods. let's take, for example, Gayatri Spivak, one of the leading figures from that paradigm. She's speaking of the problem of othering. By using our Western methodologies, we make the others foreign. And the question of can the subaltern speak, we are taking away their voice, we are muting them, and they have lost their voice, and we are defining them. So this huge problem, a problem induced by methodology. That's the point where maybe representatives from post-qualitative research might come in. Actually, when you read their publications, they actually claim that their approach post-qualitative research is ideal to avoid the pitfalls of this so-called epistemic violence. So we read a little bit deeper into what post-qualitative research is. And we are looking at post-qualitative research in intercultural communication research. So how do studies with post-qualitative approaches perform of ethical and normative orientations that what we've been interested in play when post are applied to intercultural research? And of course, above all, the third question is intercultural, how do they define it? How do they deal with it? How do they conceive it? That's what we wanted to look at. To go deeper into this field, we think it might also be useful to have a short summary of what post-qualitative itself to be. One important thing is they reject qualitative research as their predecessors. They say it has always been racist, qualitative research, and of course that has to be overcome. One of their main goals is social justice, rather than a scientific or academic goal of new knowledge, which might be a traditional goal in research, is almost second order to that, or at least only in the service of reaching social justice. It is about decentering of people and knowledge. So human beings should be seen as part of nature and material environment. So here we have aspects of post-humanism or new materialism. They even more reject evidence-based research. We know qualitative researchers did that too. And they highlight aspects like reflexivity and voice as their new goals. They want to avoid interpretations. That might be one main point as a contrast to qualitative research, because interpretations are always featured by othering. Instead, researchers should reflect their own positionalities. And one very challenging aim is they want to find new linguistic and a pre-discursive level, because they say as soon as you go to a linguistic language verbal communication level, you are already of to keep away from that. Another characteristic, interesting point is they take the readers into consideration. When they try to avoid interpretation, they acknowledge that actually the readers reading our publications are again another level of interpretation. They interpret what they read. As a writer, you cannot avoid this point, but at least you have to take it into consideration and try to control or steer it in any kind of way. So these are very a wide array goals. Take these aims and these goals, these what does that mean for post-qualitative research in intercultural communication or applied to intercultural communication research? One thing, of course, we can no longer focus on otherness and difference, but instead our new approach to overcome the old culture that might and perception. So actually researchers can only write about what they see, but not about so-called foreign cultures anymore.
Yeah, and I take it over from here on. So what we did was, because like you already heard Dominic explain it, the post-qualitative research broad and it's an umbrella term, and we wanted to look at how methods perform. So we first identified three more distinct methodologies or approaches, and you can see them here. The first one is the participatory research approach. In this, the researched are involved in the research design and as well the research process in very different ways and to varying degrees. And important in this paradigm and this approach is the circular alternation of action reflection. The second one that we identified was the arts-based research approach, in which researchers consume, receive, and or produce art of various kinds and reflect on it together with the research. As a third method, we identified the auto-ethnographic research, in which researchers explore their own environment from their subjective position, reflect on it, and describe their own positionality. So how and ways they perceive themselves, and also in doing that, contextualizing the surrounding political, social, and cultural norms. So now to look at the field of intercultural communication, what we actually did, our method, we conducted this in April 2021, and the search results had to contain the keyword intercultural, as well as one of the 4 keywords post-qualitative, auto-participatory, or arts-based, either in the title and on the abstract and or the keywords. The search was conducted then between the years of 2009 and 2021 in the disciplines of social science and humanities. The search yielded 196 hits, but in a rough screening, these hits were cleared of texts that on a closer inspection had not conducted any research on aspects of intercultural communication using the methods mentioned. So what remained was a sample of 22 texts that were subjected to a more detailed analysis. The vast majority of those texts were found in those 6 very well-known journals. Just for you to have a quick look on them, we sampled them here. Overall, we had 11 items that were matched with the auto-ethnographic research. We had 11 texts that followed a participatory research method, and we had 8 items that followed an arts-based approach. So let's have a look at our interpretations and our results. And as you can see here, for this presentation, for the benefit of this presentation, we structured them under quite 2 very straightforward elements: shortcomings and opportunities. And we identified 2 major shortcomings in the samples we analyzed. And the first one is quite simple. They could not uphold the announced or claimed methodology. So in the end, for example, they announced to follow a participatory research, but in the end conducted mere interviews. A more complex or difficult shortcoming we found was that subjects in the end were not really or actually speaking for themselves, but were highly interpreted in the end by the authors again, therefore kind of annihilating the potential. Another shortcoming was that they tied their results too strict back to existing theories. For example, we stumbled upon the old acculturation theory from Berry, but also the culture shock concept from Oberg, as well as contrast culture and or old discrimination concepts. Let's go to the opportunities. What we found was that old or already existing theories were newly combined or modified. For example, one study showed that the acculturation process, according to Berry, is indeed much more individual, complex, and less linear than assumed in theory. Another very important opportunity that we found was that some studies imported new theories from other disciplines, like the rhizome from Guattari and Deleuze, cyborg, we have Haraway again, or biometography from Audre Lorde. For example, that this led to a thought or a thinking of interculturality as a rhizome. And maybe the most promising, the last but most promising and exciting finding was that new theories were able to be formulated, like in this one case, the concept of discursive cross-culturing. And we found this opportunity or this prospect of post-qualitative research very exciting. Yeah, Dominic, do you wrap it up? You have to unmute you.
Sorry, thanks. So what do these results mean to research on interculturality and intercultural communication? Well, the first most important result is rather disappointing. Most of the studies actually take interculturality just for granted, saying that they do research with people from 2 different nations, and that does mean that the situation has to be intercultural automatically. Another aspect is that post-qualitative research actually comes a little bit into conflict with the paradigm of cultural or intercultural communication, because a post-qualitative approach would actually require that the notion of culture can never be fixed beforehand before getting into research. It should emerge through and during the research process, but it can never be defined before. So that results in a dilemma of circularity. So can we research culture without having a notion of it beforehand? And also, can intercultural research conform with post-qualitative rules at all? Well, the answer might be no if we interpret it from a very strict perspective. So there's a dilemma between the idea of using the culturalist paradigm and post-qualitative research. Another aspect is that even post-qualitative approaches are not immune to the interferences of power. So actually, an additional critical view will also need to be applied to these approaches as well. We all still need a power critical perspective. And of course, if post-qualitative researchers criticize that strongly their predecessors, the qualitative researchers, these qualitative researchers, of course, have a reply. And they say that post-qualitative research is nothing new. And what they claim to do anew is what qualitative research actually has been doing all the time. And the problem is rather that post-qualitative researchers have always misinterpreted qualitative research or taken it by its worst examples. We're coming to the end. Thanks. Yeah. Let's come to the conclusion. That could lead us to the conclusion to say, well, post-qualitative research is only old wine in new bottles. But as we said in the beginning, we found the approaches quite fascinating, and that would be a little bit disappointing and boring. So from our discourse perspective, we were able to derive something else from that. Actually, what we can say is that post-qualitative research on interculturality might primarily be interested in outlining visions. Visions behind what interculturality should be about, what living in an intercultural world should be about. These visions can be inspired by global theories like social justice or Freire's liberation theory, but these are very general theories, and from our discourse approach, we assume that actually every person and also every researcher has their own perspective on what intercultural living together and interculturality should be about. And these texts and these new approaches are instruments to bring these visions across in an academically acceptable way. So theories and methods may not only, but may serve to unravel these visions. Yeah, that's our preliminary result from our reading into post-qualitative research. We hope it is not only a short journey, we hope that it's a journey that we can continue. So thank you very much for listening, and we hope that there might be still some time left for questions that we are looking forward to, of course. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely, Professor Dominique. Thank you very much for an insightful presentation. We have 10 more minutes for questions and answers. So remember to just raise your hand, use the chat box or your microphone directly.
Malcolm is
Okay,
raising his hand.
Malcolm.
Hi, yeah, Dominic and Emilian, I loved your paper, of course. I mean, as a journal editor, I was absolutely fascinated and I wanted to see the LAIC papers coming up for a good critique. And you got some in there. I mean, I can't disagree with anything you're saying here, but I was very interested that your main focus was really on theories and methods, on, if you like, the research design aspect of what you're looking at, which I thought was entirely reasonable. But as a journal editor, of course, I'm very preoccupied with the genre of the research paper. And I would put it to you that, you know, that the post-qualitative researchers are having to kind of operate within the constraints, and this is where the power comes in, of normative genres. Normative genres like the length and, if you like, form of the research paper, and also for those who are seeking research grants, of course, also the genre of the research grant application, and if you like, the buttons they have to press in order to get the money and then report to the funders. Now, this is the institutional power aspect. And I mean, I am in this struggle on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I believe in trying to deconstruct the genre of the research paper, believe it or not, folks. But at the same time, you know, I've got to keep looking respectable in the broader academic community. I'm always welcome to advice on how to negotiate this. And you know, this is the great thing about conferences. But yeah, I just want to raise the kind of dimension of genre in the stuff you're talking about here, basically. It's a comment.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Well, you might have noticed that there's a large proportion of articles from IALIC journal, and we could also, of course, analyze the role of you as an editor who gives them the chance and the opportunity to publish, and you giving your contribution to at least alleviating this power problem.
Well,
but if you take that step even a little bit further, actually the form of publishing papers does not really fit to their aims. Actually, what they better needed to do would be some arts events, maybe, but then should not be written down in the end, because if you write it down, you have a linear text that is going to be published, and you have your readers, and so on and so on. So it's not really a consequence. But yeah, I totally agree. They have to manage somehow to get into the, if they want to be researchers, into this overall scheme. Of course, that has strong limitations. And of course, when we criticize that they are not really able to stick to their aims, it might not be their own fault. But of course, there are many structural constraints. Yes, that's true.
Thank you.
Thank you. We still have minutes for a couple more questions. We have a question on the chat box. No, Russ, could you find a link with this post-qualitative turn in search with the mood of the time, COVID world order?
It's quite a broad question, tricky question. Of course, we could speculate. But I think this post-qualitative turn is more linked to, like we tried to outline in the beginning, more linked to this new dynamic coming from really post-colonial thinkers, yeah, focusing the methods. And I think it's more about, yeah, what this post-colonial strain brought into, for example, also intercultural communication field is, yeah, that we really have to think about the settlement of power. Where is it? And not only in like a way of the theoretical kind of thinking, but also in the methods themselves. I think that's where it comes from, but I found your question very interesting. I don't know, Dominic, maybe you have an also philosophical answer.
It's difficult question. Thank you anyway. Well, one point is the publication publications we've read, of course, all have been written before the COVID-19 crisis. Even when they have appeared in 2020, they have been written long before. Of course, on the other hand, when we said, and that's really true, we came to, we got the chance to read much more than during normal university times. And of course, the COVID-19 atmosphere also inspires or might inspire the need or the will, the want to read something new, to find something new. Of course, it's a period of change where at least from concerning us, it might have inspired us to read into something else. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Sorry, it was a very broad question, but I thought at the beginning of the talk, sorry. Yeah, thank you very much for your answer. It was a fascinating talk, and sorry for the very broad question. It just
no, thank you
very
much.
Question.
Fine, question. Completely fine.
Right. Cheers for your very thank you for a very interesting answer as well. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Professor Manuela Guillermo has a question.
Manuela, no professor.
All right.
I found your motive, your purpose very interesting. I find that we really need some work on that. Working based on journal articles have some constraints. Has, as you mentioned, and also Malcolm McDonald about the Light journal. But it would be interesting, I think, I imagine, to try to find in the articles, in the description of the projects, some aspects which are more innovative, without without being too limited to whether it is post-qualitative or not, because I believe that the post in something doesn't delink the necessary connections with what was done before. Of course, in order to be published or in order to be evaluated, the authors and the scholars and the researchers to respond to some normative criteria of what is or is not scientific. But anyway, I believe you can, and I'm very interested in reading. I'm looking forward to reading, your work on that. Is to try to find something which is innovative and it responds to an intercultural approach, which is critical and decolonial. Although it is scientific as well, because in universities, like those in Latin America, the scholars also tend to respond to scientific criteria in order to have their work published, not only in their own languages, but also in English. So this is perhaps more a comment than a question.
Yeah, thank you. That's actually one interesting point. The question about the word post-qualitative. To be honest, we came in our research process very lately to the word post-qualitative. We first dealt with auto-ethnographic research, participatory, and arts-based research, and then we started thinking, could we find an umbrella term? Yeah. That might be post-qualitative, it might also be something else. Alternatively, we had non-interpretive research. maybe. So we're not completely sure or decided about the post-qualitative.
Yeah, what I have found that perhaps meets what you were trying to find is non-extractivist methodologies, which means that the researcher does not go there just to find data and bring it back and make your own interpretation. That's why, and I found that important also by giving back to the community with whom you were working. So, but that's what I've been trying to read about and in Latin American scholarship, you find quite a lot about non-extractivist methodologies. But congratulations, because you know that this is so relevant and so necessary. So please keep up with the good work.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And unfortunately, time is up. I want to thank you and congratulate, and a big round of applause for the 3 presenters of today and those of you who have made the discussion possible. And before we all leave, I would like to ask you for a big favor. I would like to take a screenshot of the event organization. They want to keep a record of you know, all the talks and the presentations of the day. So if you're willing to open your cameras for a minute, I will be taking a screenshot. Thank you. Okay, I think we're ready. There you go. Thank you very much. And we are going to a break right now. It's a lunch break in Colombian time, and maybe those of you who have matching time zones. For the rest, just enjoy the break and see you in the afternoon. Goodbye.